No. I made up the Infinity Stones in 2 seconds. I have no idea I had no idea that it was going to become what it was going to become. Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy.
Do not ever call me at the source.
It's just a metaphor, dude. His people are completely literal. Metaphors are gonna go over his head.
Nothing goes over my head. My reflexes are too fast. I would catch it.
I'm gonna die surrounded by the biggest idiots in the galaxy.
I was a big fan of the Marvel movies. I saw all the Marvel movies in theaters. Some of them I liked, some of them I didn't like as much, but I saw them all. I'm a big comic book fan. I read tons of comics of Marvel and DC comics. I had met with Kevin Feige a few times about different things, like just kind of a general meeting where we went in and we talked. And then when Guardians was coming around, I was really in a strange place in my career where I was a little dejected. It was after Super came out. And I was working on a television show with a production company that was kind of cool. I had just done a video game called Lollipop Chainsaw. And I'm like, you know what? I think I'm going to quit directing movies. Unless you're doing a Marvel movie or something like that, you're not going to be able to do anything. And I didn't think I was, after just making a $3 million movie that didn't make money, I didn't think I was going to be hired to direct a Marvel movie. So they called me into Guardians of the Galaxy right after I had told my agent that I was going to quit making movies. It's all the way in Manhattan Beach. Like I was living in Studio City. I walked in and they're like, so we got this thing, Guardians of the Galaxy. Have you heard of them? I'm like, yes, I've heard of them. But frankly, I was more familiar with the original Guardians of the Galaxy, Yondu and those different characters, and not Star-Lord and Groot and Gamora. And they showed me like what they were thinking about for these characters and what they were going to do. And I was like, sounds kind of like Bugs Bunny in the middle of the Avengers. I wasn't sure. How are you going to make a talking raccoon? Like, how's that going to work? I really walked out of there just not only not thinking I would ever get the gig, but also not really being convinced that I wanted to do it anyway. I went home and I got stuck, of course, in terrible traffic. I'm in the car and I'm like, all right, so it's about a talking raccoon. I'm like, that's can be silly. I'm like, but what would be the circumstances if it was real? And it just came to me that if it was real, that raccoon would be the saddest creature in the entire universe, and that he would feel utterly and completely alone and have a very difficult time in life. That to me was the beginning of Guardians. And that's why I knew that from doing the first one to the last one, where it ended up is where it needed to end up, with this character basically having a spiritual awakening in which he goes outside of himself and sees himself in both a more important and less important way. And that was the journey of those 3 movies for me, was about Rocket, who's a character who I've felt closer to than any other character I've ever put on film, without a doubt.
Well, I didn't ask to get made. I didn't ask to be torn apart and put back together over and over and turned into some little monster.
I loved Star Wars so much as a kid, and I started to see where this could be a movie that was not like Star Wars, but had the effect on kids that Star Wars had on me when I was a kid. When I walked into the grocery store for the first time and saw C-3PO on the cover of People magazine and Chewbacca on the cover of People magazine, I was like, oh my God, what is this magical movie that I have to see so badly? This is more important to me than anything else in life. I thought that I could do that with a raccoon in a tree.
I am...
Well, that's just as fascinating as the first 89 times you told me that. What is wrong with Tree here?
Well, he don't know talking good like me and you. So his vocabularistics is limited to I and am and Groot.
He says I am Groot in the comics. And there's a weird explanation for it that he can only, it's some strange thing. Now things have all been changed so that they're more like the movie. But in my version, he said I am Groot, and only really Rocket understood what he was saying. And then as time went on, he attached and bonds with other people. They also start to understand what he's saying. And so by Guardians 3, all those characters understand perfectly what he's saying when he's saying, I am Groot. And that's what the end of the movie is about, right? The end of the movie where he says, I love you guys.
I love you guys.
Now it's the audience, too, has bonded with the character in such a way that we all understand what he's saying. He did it thousands of times. That really wasn't me. I mean, I gave Vin lots of notes on how to say lines, but Vin is weird. He would have something in his head about the way he needed to say something. It'd just be again, and he'd be saying, like, I am Groot. so many times. Like, frankly, it was very boring for me because I had to sit there and just hear him saying, I am Groot, in a way that I could not in any way discern the difference. It wasn't really me putting that on Vin. It was Vin doing that himself.
And the remnants of these systems were forged into concentrated ingots. Infinity Stone.
I never understood what any of the faces were in Marvel. I don't know what any of it means. Like, I have no clue what it means. I have no clue what any of that stuff ever meant. I knew there were Infinity Stones when they said, you know, we've been thinking, and we think that maybe some of these things have been Infinity Stones in different ways. And so could you write up what the Infinity Stones mean? When I wrote the scene with the Collector, explaining that, you know, there was this explosion and then the Infinity Stones were born and what they mean and where they came from, that was literally me just sitting down for 3 minutes and writing that. And that's then what became the rest of the Infinity Stones. There was never anybody that said anything other than, I think the red thing and the blue thing are going to end up being Infinity Stones. That wasn't in the plan to begin with. No. I made up the Infinity Stones in 2 seconds. I have no idea I had no idea that it was going to become what it was going to become. The purple Infinity Stone was there. No, it wasn't. It was red. So when we shot it, it was red. In the movie, I shot a red Infinity Stone. And then afterwards, they were like, yeah, I think we're going to make the thing in Thor 2 an Infinity Stone. And that one's red. So we had to change it from red to purple in post. I always play music from the movie on set when I can. The actors know what's happening. The camera operators can move to the music. The rhythm is correct. But the same thing with score. So we write the score before the movie, and then we play the score on set. In Superman, which is basically a score movie more than a soundtrack movie, that we have tons of score by John Murphy that we played on set. There are all the songs in all the Guardians movies and in every Suicide Squad. My 3 favorites are probably Come a Little Bit Closer in Guardians 2, Just a Gigolo with Harley Quinn and the Suicide Squad, and Beastie Boys in Guardians 3. They're all the big action sequences. Those are the places where I think the music and the action, they were also probably the 3 things I worked the hardest on.
I'm done running.
My favorite scenes would be some rocket ones. The moment at the end of 3 where you realize that he realized all life has meaning. You see the first step of him where he loves himself because he sees the baby raccoons, and you realize that that's what he was and that he needs to save the baby raccoons. And then you see the next moment where he starts to look around and sees all the other animals that are in the cages, and he realizes they all mean something and he needs to save all of them. Rocket never does a single heroic thing that isn't for his friends. He does not have empathy for people outside of his core group, ever. He's just too damaged until that moment at the end, and that's why he becomes the leader of the Guardians of the Galaxy at the end of 3, because he's actually able to take that on and have compassion for everyone. And he doesn't really until that point. I also really like Drax petting Rocket in the first Guardians when he leans over and he pets him and you see Rocket stiffen up and then he relaxes and takes it in. I just feel partially imprinted on animals, so animals are as important to me in a lot of ways as people are. I was raised with a dog that was my sister. I knew her before. I'm the oldest of 6, but I had a dog immediately. I think that there's an innocence and a presence to animals that, you know, humans lack, but I love animals, and so I just think I write them naturally, whether it's from Scooby-Doo or the dogs in Dawn of the Dead or, you know, whatever. It's always, I love animals. The Suicide Squad.
Why did my people not alert me of your arrival?
We didn't see any people.
Yeah, I didn't see anybody.
There's no one out there.
I turned them into my mother in my head and killed them.
Suicide Squad's obviously a different project, and every project is different. But I also think the three Guardians movies are very different from each other in their own ways. You know, obviously I was making a rated R movie from the beginning, so that was a big difference. But it was a fun group of actors. I love Harley Quinn. I always have since she was first on the cartoons. Ratcatcher 2 is kind of our own thing, but I love, Daniela, and she's fantastic. Idris is a great guy, total movie star, and creating Bloodsport with him was fun. And I love David Desmalchian's sort of haunted take on Polka Dot Man. So, and of course, my friend John Cena as Peacemaker was the most fun of all. I thought he was creepy as hell. That's what I love about Starro. He's so big and comic booky and crazy, but at the same time, the whole concept with the starfish on people's faces, I always found so creepy and scary. And I love that kind of combination of the darkness of that, but also the big, fun, brash comic bookiness of it. Most fun to make was maybe the one on the roof where John Cena has to eat 36 empanadas to get the scene going, and I think he was pooping his brains out for the next 36 hours. He has tenacity and perseverance. Peacemaker.
Don't be trustworthy. Just let me ask you a question and don't tell anybody about it, okay?
I would never betray a secret.
And it's the opposite of everything you've been saying. Truth is, I'm supposed to be in prison.
For what?
Superhero shit.
I will be honest, Peacemaker's my favorite thing I've ever done. People ask me which movie do you like the best, and I'm like, I really think I like Peacemaker the best. 6.5 hours of television, so we get to know those characters in depth. And as much as we think we get to know the Guardians over 3 movies, in that same amount of time, we're telling the stories of Peacemaker and Vigilante and John Economos, and we get to know those characters. I think the group of actors is one of my favorites I've ever worked with. I love working with John. I get to work with my wife, and there's no holds barred. I mean, it's doing Peacemaker as a movie would be an incredibly risky prospect, but it's as crazy and far out and violent and nasty and heartfelt as it is, and it's totally mainstream television. It was an enormous hit on Max. It's interesting because in Peacemaker season 1, we get to see Chris Smith, Peacemaker, get to a certain place emotionally and change. We don't just go back, and it's not just the same Peacemaker in season 2 doing all the same stuff. It is a different human being. He's grown, he's changed, and we get to see that. And so it's a much more emotional season than season 1. Creature Commandos. You just have to be really careful about what you show. Being with Marvel, that people really can take things apart. You're always going to make mistakes, but that's how it is. But that, again, too, was really a wonderful experience, and just the easiest experience for me, quite frankly, because I wrote the screenplays. I wrote them pretty quickly, and then Dean Lorey and his team took over, and the people at Bobby Pill's Animation. I gave notes, but it was not overly much. And so in terms of something that I didn't direct, that was my favorite experience because just they did such an amazing job. I don't really write things down so much. I think I just kind of know when I'm creating a character, where they've been and sometimes where they're going. Weasel appeared in Suicide Squad, and he's a one-off joke character. He survives at the end. In the end credits, you find out his sort of horrible backstory, where he's not just a joke. He's this very sad creature who is trying to be a hero. We hear that he killed 27 children in the Suicide Squad. Ends up being an exaggeration. Also ends up not being true, that we find out in Creature Commandos. This just was always a part of who I thought he was. Just like what I always thought Rocket was from the beginning, and where Rocket was going to go from where he started. With some characters, I think I have a more complete view of who they are. Dawn of the Dead.
If we start letting people in here, we're gonna let the wrong ones in, and then I'm dead. And you know what? I don't want to die.
We're the wrong ones.
Nobody here is sick, and I intend on keeping it that way.
Look, I just think we should...
I did not ask for your opinion, lady!
Dawn of the Dead was my friend Eric Newman, who's now a showrunner on Narcos and a bunch of different Netflix shows, came to me and he wanted to do a remake of Dawn of the Dead. And I didn't really want to just do a remake that was just a straight up remake. I thought it was interesting to take a remake that basically took the same situation but told the story in a different way. Once the screenplay was done, that's when Zach came around. You know, really the hard thing about doing both Scooby-Doo and Dawn of the Dead really for me was I'd seemed to be at the lightning rod of all this controversy from the beginning. But Dawn of the Dead, there was, you know, people found out it was being remade, and there was a petition online to stop the making of Dawn of the Dead with hundreds of thousands of signatures. All of a sudden, I'm showing up on page 6 in the New York Post, you know, because of Dawn of the Dead as a screenwriter who, you know, screenwriters like aren't really that well known, especially the guy who just wrote one hit movie. There was controversy around Scooby-Doo, controversy around Dawn of the Dead. So somehow I was becoming involved in these projects that had all this controversy for one reason or the other, and it leads all the way to today. Scooby-Doo.
Scooby-Doo, what are you doing, man? Like this is no time to... Like there's a ghost right behind me, isn't there?
I had just moved to Los Angeles. I had made an independent movie there. Lorenzo de Bonaventura, who was the head of production at Warner Brothers at the time, asked me to come in and pitch on Scooby-Doo. It's like he just wanted me to do Scooby-Doo. And then I did. It was simple. I got hired to write Scooby-Doo. I love dogs. I loved Scooby-Doo when I was a little kid. My first ever nightmare was of Captain Cutler's ghost. It's the sea guy that goes in the sea diver's helmet. One of my earliest memories. So I was excited to take on the project.
Daphne, exit through the entrance. Velma and I will enter here through the exit there. And Shaggy and Scooby, do whatever you guys do.
It was never dramatic. The original script was geared towards a little bit more of an older audience. Not much, but it was kind of post-Scream, so it was a little bit different, and it kind of got changed a little bit as time went on. At that time, I think it was really fun to do Scooby-Doo because it had never been done in live action before. It was only really the cartoon version, so the challenge of adapting it, I found fun. Since then, I've done a lot of different projects that have been adapted from comic books or cartoons or books or whatever, and I enjoy the process of doing it. Slither. Slither was definitely a love letter to all the body horror movies that I grew up with. The biggest of them is They Came From Within, also known as Shivers, which is a Cronenberg movie, one of his very first films, movie I love, which is really the worms going in through the mouth and taking over the people. The Blob, it was Night of the Living Dead. It was just a lot of the different, usually lower budget horror movies that I grew up with, and then taking that and then trying to create real people in the show that we could really feel for, that were put into this ridiculous situation, and have them act as real as they possibly could, despite the sort of black comedy horror elements of the show.
Sugarful, you really think you should be asking so many questions when it's so close to your birthday?
My birthday is not for 2 months.
That's close.
Slither was the first time I worked with Rooker. I was a fan of Rooker for a long time. I remember seeing Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer in theaters. It was very disturbing, but I thought that guy was amazing. He brought a vulnerability to this monster in Slither that you don't expect. And we feel sad for him. We feel sad for the monster. He brings a lot of pathos to it. But the same thing is true of him as Yondu. He starts out as what you think of as a bad guy, and he just ends up taking the most heroic turn in the movie. Brenda was interesting. She's a very good actor, but also she got claustrophobia. So she had to sit in this big thing that looked like a big zit. We could only shoot for a very short amount of time in a row because she would become really freaked out. I hate gore in real life, by the way. I was going through a deck for the movie Clayface, which is being made now at DC. And they were showing me a bunch of reference photos from different horrible things, and they were real, and they were just laughing at me because I really can't look. I just am closing my eyes the whole time. And they're like, James Gunn is the one who's like so grossed out that he can't look. And I'm really squeamish, but if I know it's not real, it just, my brain changes, and it's interesting. The Belko Experiment.
I know no one wants to actually think about sacrificing 30 lives, but if it means saving the lives of an additional...
It doesn't matter what the
circumstances are, we do not have the right to take innocent human lives.
Belko Experiment came to me as a dream. I dreamt the trailer for the Belko Experiment, and it was basically the beginning of the movie, where the guy comes on the overhead speakers and says, in the next, 12 hours, you need to kill 2 people, or else, 30 of you are going to die, or whatever. And then the walls close up around the building. I just kind of had that premise to begin with, and I sat down and I wrote it pretty quickly for fun. And it was something I was actually going to direct way back in 2006, 2007. Was going through a divorce at that time, and I didn't really want to be going and making this dark movie in another country and be away from my friends at that time. So I went ahead and did another job instead. Super.
All it takes to be a superhero is the choice to fight evil.
Super taught me a lot. It really isn't a superhero movie. It's about this guy, Frank Darbo, and what his life is like in that moment, and how he sort of has a breakdown and comes out on the other side of it. I think Super definitely set me up for what I'm doing now, because I think it was one of the things that Marvel saw where they wanted me to do Guardians of the Galaxy. I actually think they just liked the movie, because I also really liked, I used to do a web series called PG Porn, and I did a web show for Xbox called Humanzy, and those things also, too, were things that they really liked. So it was just, I think, the kind of a different spin on something. Super obviously didn't set the world on fire. It wasn't a big box office hit. It's still one of my favorite movies. And ironically, my lowest rated film on Rotten Tomatoes, but also the one that I, along with, strangely, Guardians 2, that I get the most often people tell me is their favorite movie.
It just seems so unfair, God. Other people have goodness. They have good things. They have love and tenderness. People who care about their lives.
Rain he's just a very talented, serious actor who can go very deep, and yet people don't see him that way. The scene in which he gives praise to God about helping him as he's sobbing, and he was it's kneeling at the end of the bed, and I was on the other side of the bed for that whole time. And being able to see Rain do what he did up close for the whole movie and help to guide him, it was fun.
So is this his time to get away from Dwight?
Yeah, I think it was partially getting away from, it was a way to do that. I mean, that's impossible to do, but yeah. I don't think I've ever walked around with anyone who gets yelled at by their fake name more than Rain. Dwight. And he's so tall. I was married to one of the people in the office, but she was able to put on a hat and walk around and whatever. Rain doesn't have that luxury. Superman.
Today, the Secretary of Defense said he was going to look into your actions. That's funny.
My actions? I stopped a war.
They came to me years ago and said, we'd love for you to do Superman. This is like Toby Emmerich back in 2018 or something. I was like, I don't know how to do Superman. And I just always was thinking, how do you do Superman? How do you do Superman? I had a hard time with it. It's a lot of responsibility, and it is a tightrope act, because what is it about the character that needs to remain the same, that is truly important to who the character is? And where can you take the chances and go in the other direction to keep audiences wanting to see this character that was created in 1938? What can you add to the lore of Superman in the movies to make it a little bit different? And that's when I did Suicide Squad. I have always focused on oddballs. On the one hand, Superman is the ultimate oddball. He's an alien from another planet who doesn't belong. On the other hand, he's the ultimate not an oddball. He's a strong, masculine white dude who's like just very square and center. How do I find the story that I want to tell in all of that's going to be interesting and artistically invigorating, that also won't, make audiences run away? And so that was always just the challenge of it all.
You seemingly acting as a representative of the United States.
I wasn't representing anybody except for me and doing good.
What I think it's about is goodness and the core values of kindness and compassion towards other human beings, and how it's important no matter what. Every life is sacred. Those are the values that I grew up with, and those are the values that I believe in today. I think you hear Frank Darbo saying exactly what I believe at the end of Super. When you don't do this, you don't do that, those things do not change.
You don't sell drugs! You don't molest little children! You don't profit on the misery of others!
The rules were set a long time ago!
And I think Superman is about that, but he lives in a world where everything seems relative. And he lives in a world where goodness is considered old-fashioned. Goodness is considered Pollyanna. How do you tell that story about that character who's essentially a good character, but also has his own crisis of faith in the movie that we see?
Your actions, that's what makes you who you are.
I don't believe in superhero fatigue. I think there's, mediocre movie fatigue. I think you can tell stories about anything. If you see the same gangster movie over and over, you're going to get so bored. But if you see different types of criminals doing different things that are involved in different activities, different levels of morality, different styles, it's not going to ever get boring. And I think the same thing is true about superheroes. And if the only thing that we have to offer is one character showing up and seeing two characters together that we've never seen on screen before, that was really exciting when it first happened. Nobody cares anymore. This concept of superhero fatigue in one way is real because there have been a lot of superhero movies that maybe haven't been up to what they should have been or what the audience wanted. You see the same thing happening across the board with movies in general, that people are not making the movies that need to bring people into the cinemas. That's why something like Barbie works so well. Barbie did something differently than what other big movies like that did. And people went to the theater. And I wrote Margot the morning that came out. I said, thank you, for helping to keep theaters alive. I saw Greta Gerwig the other day. I was like, thanks. And I think there's a few filmmakers like that now. I think Matt Reeves is like that. He's a filmmaker that makes big pop movies, but they have soul and they're different. And whether you like his movies or not, that's not the important thing. He is doing something different. Being able to see those chances being taken on a big canvas is important. I want the cinema-going experience to continue. I want, my nephews and nieces and their children to be able to experience what I've been able to experience, going to a theater and seeing the magic of cinema. I just think we need to take risks. It hasn't been happening because people are so afraid of making a mistake. I think we should make a lot more mistakes.